older than I am. And one of the reasons our parents had us so close together is that because she would be a little bit delayed in reaching those milestones, we could do those things together. So all those things you hit as a toddler, potty training, all of the walking, because she was a little bit delayed and I was a little bit younger, we hit those together. So for the first few years, it was almost like having twins for my parents because we did all those things together. But she went to a different preschool than I did. She went to a different elementary school than I did. And so I knew that she had some unique needs and had to go to other places for therapy, for special ed classes, for those kind of things that made us less twin-like and kind of start taking these different paths. You know, and this was in the early 80s. She was born in 77. I was born in 79. So the act that had all special ed kids required for school districts to be able to service them had just passed in the 70s. And so really, she was kind of a groundbreaker in our school system in a small town in Oklahoma. She was actually the first person with Down syndrome to go through the school system from beginning to graduation. And so, and it doesn't seem like that long ago that they were just pioneers in this area. But my parents did a great job of being very teaching to me. They didn't force, you know, there's feelings that you deal with as a parent, as a sibling. There's things that typical siblings do to embarrass you. And there's things that special needs siblings can do to embarrass you. And you want to get angry and you want to get frustrated by that, but then you know that your sibling with a disability probably didn't intentionally do that. You know, we see that with my boys too. But growing up, my parents did a great job of not making me feel shame for any frustration that I felt. They very gently guided me to understand the diversity and beauty of God's creation, and that disabilities can be a reflection of his love for us, because Sybil was a gift to our family. She really brought our community together. They brought our church together in ways that they served her and served our family. And they brought our family together. You know, we're still close now, and we always will be, because she will continue to need my care and care from our younger sister, Sarah. And so there's ways that we as a family are more compassionate, more empathetic, and all of those gifts came because she's in our lives.
You know, it's interesting you made the point that your parents intentionally had another child right behind the birth of your sister. This is a maturity and a vision that is really quite unusual in really thinking this out. They must have put a lot of prayer and looked at a pattern of God that said that this would be the, not just the logical, but we would have an internal system of support, understanding, and compassion, and the two of them can grow up together and really be a part of each other's lives, and the bonding process will be much more secure if it happens earlier than later and the differences are more distinct and obvious.
That's true. Yeah, and you think, you know, most people who have children with Down syndrome, it's their youngest child, because your chances of having a child with Down syndrome go up the older you get. And so for my parents to have a child with Down syndrome as their first child, this was, you know, not anything they could really like Google and find out some guidance on that. And so I have two uncles who are doctors, and they're the ones who encouraged my parents to have us as close together as possible, and just really laid out the benefits of that. And you're right, they just trusted that this was God's plan, and that he would continue to guide and equip them to parent both of us, even if for some reason I had disabilities as well.
Did you find that as you were growing up and the spiritual lessons were being given to you from church and from your parents, that your sister developed a perspective of God that was unique and different than yours? Because typically in a Down syndrome child, there is deep compassion, there is a great deal of sensitivity, there is something that seems to open up a portal into a dimension that is different than you and I might exhibit in how they perceive and how they understand and how they process. Did you see her, as she developed her own personal relationship with God and her God lessons, processed differently than yours?
I think so. She has a propensity to joy that I don't have, just naturally. I'm more of a not a pessimist, but just more of a realist. And so to see the joy that she has in big things and little things has always been an encouragement to me. She's also very empathetic. She's a person who, if she senses that you're sad or that you're upset, she comes alongside you and just kind of, some of us have a tendency to try to fix things that are wrong. She doesn't have that tendency. She just has the gift of compassion and empathy, where she can sit with you, rub your back, pat on you, and just really be there. And I think those are gifts from God, because I need those continually. I needed them as I was growing up. Our family needed them. And then, she has her own spiritual development. She was accepted Christ. She was baptized at a rate that was normal for her, and that we supported as we grew up. And so it was great to see that. It's still great to see how she prays for other people, how she talks to God in a childlike and innocent way. And so she's really an example to me of not trying to overcomplicate our relationship with God, not trying to add too many big words or theological terms, but really just come to him as Jesus called all children to him.
It's interesting. Before we went to break, before we opened the show, I said to you, I'm wondering, when Jesus said, "Come to me as little children," if the model of Down syndrome isn't that perfect picture of how we are to come with an unbridled, complete acceptance, this beauty, this richness, and none of the trappings of the world seem to enter in, and we find that compassion flows freely. I can't think of a single Down syndrome child or adult that I know that is not incredibly compassionate and wants to hug you and wants to involve you and tell you about their latest project and tell you how good God is and guess what God did for me today, and share a story with you. And it's so innocent and it's so pure, and it seems that they have this, and I don't want to call it simplicity because it's not simple. There is a complex dimension to it, which is very connected to God, that seems to be more personal, deeper, and never gets stale. It's always fresh and renewed daily, and they seem to be more consistent in this form of daily joy, daily compassion, daily empathy, daily nurturing, daily giving. And it seems that if we were to examine it, maybe there's parts of that we might be a little bit jealous of or envious of, that we don't approach every day with such pure joy and such pure celebration, which I think is one of the reasons why you wrote this book, was to explain the rich beauty that lies beneath the surface of things we don't understand about this one chromosome that plays such a big part in development. But we find that although there may not be high functioning capabilities in some areas of life, there are high functioning capabilities in all areas of spirituality almost uniformly across the spectrum of Down syndrome.
Yes, that's true. I remember talking to my parents when I was young about what Sybil would be like when we were in heaven. Would I recognize her? With these deficiencies, what would be their cure in heaven? And really, I think she'll be very much the way she is now. I think those challenges of communication will not exist anymore, but I think the core essence of who she is will carry on with her into eternity, because those are the best things about her. And really the rest of us could learn and to emulate the joy and the compassion that she has and the trust that she has.
Isn't it amazing that here we are 70 years past the defeat of Adolf Hitler, who would take a child like your sister and consider her to be defective. And that in my growing up in the 50s, there was a school in the neighborhood called the Home for Crippled Children. And that's what they were called. And this is where you placed your child in the care of that home for whether you were day or you were an inpatient. That's how that was handled. We saw it back in the 50s and the 60s as something that was a deficiency or a problem. And today we have new insights and new understanding. Plus, if we are truly believers in God and God's sovereignty, then this was not a mistake. This was not an accident. And we have to frame our understanding of the true nature and love of God. I've said before, and maybe it's not an accurate statement, but I believe that God chooses families he can trust, and he places special needs children within their care because he can trust them to do what it is he's called them to do. So as you look at your parents, would you assess that they were people that had a relationship with God where you might say, yeah, I can look at mom and dad and believe that God trusted them in order to respond in a biblical, kind, and loving way that reflects the love of Jesus towards my sister?
Yes, I do. And really, I mentioned she was born in 1977, but when she was born, she also had an intestinal blockage that made her unable to process food. And so she was sent from our small town in Oklahoma up to Oklahoma City for an emergency surgery. And the doctor took my dad into a closet and said, your daughter has two issues, and one will kill her and one will affect her life forever. If you don't want us to fix the intestinal blockage and just let her pass away, we will do that. And so, right there, right after the birth of their first child and this whirlwind of things they didn't know, and having to go up to Oklahoma City, a place and doctors they didn't know, they were faced with a choice. Are they going to choose life for my sister, not knowing what that life would look like, or would they choose to be part of her death? And even the doctors at that time didn't fully know the potential and the capacity for people with Down syndrome and other disabilities. And so I really feel like, as young as they were, that was their first faith test. Do we trust God enough with this unknown future to take the steps that we need to take to protect her life and to save our family unit? And so from that step until each one that God guided them on, I really see his hand in that. And even if the parents, when they first get a diagnosis, don't feel special enough or don't feel powerful enough, God develops that in us. He, as we continue to rely on him each day, even if our situation doesn't get easier, his grace is sufficient for us and continues to help us grow.
So did it surprise you when you heard the diagnosis of your child as being on the autism spectrum? Did it surprise you that you were raised in a family that God entrusted a Down syndrome child to, that you were there every step of the way through her development? Did this thought enter your head when you received this diagnosis, that aside from the unknown, did you look back and say, if my mother and father and sister can be such a blessing in my life, can I perceive this diagnosis as a part of that same blessing?
Yeah, I think most parents, when they first get the news, go through a mourning period, the cycles of grief, I think, because you envision a certain life for your child, and that has to die. James wasn't diagnosed until he was 3, so we had 3 years of mostly typical development, and so you're picturing that he will drive at 16, that he will go to college, that he will get married, that he will give you grandchildren. And when you hear, especially an autism diagnosis, because the spectrum is so wide, you don't know where your child will fall on that spectrum. And so I did have those initial feelings of fear, of even anger, because I felt like I had already been through the challenges of being part of a special needs family, and now I was going to have to do it again. One of the things that I have always thought from when I was a little girl is that someday my sister will come live with me. And then now I have this son who will also always live with me. So I have two people who are dependent on me for the rest of my life. And some people don't even have one person who's dependent on them for so long. And so we did have to wrestle through that. I think because I was raised with a sister with special needs, I tried to be a perfectionist. I tried to do a lot of things right, get good grades. I went to a Bible college, I went to seminary, I married a pastor. I tried to do this checklist of things that I thought would earn me God's pleasure and grace and goodness. And so when I got to that point of that diagnosis, I had to tell myself every day that God loves me and God loves James. And one of the verses that I look to is the verse in James where it says, every good and perfect gift comes from God. And so what I had to do was see autism as a good and perfect gift. Even if it didn't feel that way in the early days, I knew it came from God in his sovereignty. And so therefore it must be for my good. And so even if I didn't feel that in the first moments and days, I knew it. And so I had to live that out until I could say it with complete honesty and confidence.
I'm wondering that because you are a pastor's wife, there's a church involved, and there are people who judge. They look at the situation. You have a Down syndrome sister. You have an autistic son. What is it that this pastor and his wife are doing that's opening up this door? The things they might say. And then what about to the layman that's not in the ministry, who's not as biblically shored up as you? What harmful things do people say in these type of situations without realizing it? I don't think they intend them to be harmful, but there are messages that are being put out there that are quite detrimental to people who are facing these challenges on a daily basis.
Yeah, I think at some level, a lot of us, even without realizing it, have let the prosperity gospel ideas kind of seep into our theology. And so, like I said, I thought if I did these things right, that I would earn a good and easy life. And anytime that we think that we control with our actions what God does or doesn't do, that gives us way too much credit. And it also, we take way too much blame. And those can work either way. If I have a kid who's a straight A student and does everything great, I take way too much credit for that child. And then if I have a child who struggles, I can take way too much blame. And the people around us can say things that, like you said, are not intentionally hurtful, but it's almost like we have a very fresh burn, and that if anything bumps up against it, it hurts, because it's not completely healed. And so if I'm not in a place of healing, then anything that kind of bumps up against me in the form of words can be really hurtful. Like, we were at a potluck at church one time, and a couple sat down across from us, and they pointed at James and they said, "What did you do to make him like that?" And And, autism is a tricky thing because there are people out there who have ideas about the causes of that. And so, I kind of said, excuse me, what did I didn't do or not do anything. This was ordained for us. And so we live with that. But, I've gotten, did you eat too much tuna when you were pregnant? Just a bunch of different things that we can sit here and say, well, that's the most ridiculous, hurtful thing. But to them, they're not intentionally being hurtful. They're just genuinely curious, or they've read something somewhere and they want to have an opinion about it. And so I really have to remind myself of Jesus and his disciples and how they continually misunderstood what he meant. He had to continually teach them over and over again that he didn't come to overthrow the government, that he had a higher purpose, and they still didn't get it. Even they said, we want to sit with you at your right hand when you come into your kingdom. And he said, no, the last shall be first. And so I figure if Jesus and his disciples had to continually learn these lessons, and he had to continually teach, that it's just another way that I can imitate him as I try to continue to show grace and educate the people around me on what God is up to, and that it's not a punishment for us or for them even to be around our family, but that he has a purpose in it.
We're talking with Sandra Peoples, author of the newly released book, Unexpected Blessings, The Joys and Possibilities of Life in a Special Needs Family. She brings a unique perspective because she grew up in a special needs family, and then in her marriage, her 3-year-old son was diagnosed with autism. And so she is faced with the reality of having not only a sibling, but a child that will be in her care. And she addresses in her book how to be a good caregiver, how you need to avoid some of the pitfalls of caregiving. As you're aware, we have a special every month here on the Caregivers Hour with Peter Rosenberger, talking about hope for caregivers, 7 landmines that caregivers need to watch out for, and how the caregiver needs to take inventory of themselves to make sure that they're there and able to deliver on the ability to care for those with a special need. We're going to continue with Sandra's story in a few minutes, right after these brief messages. Shalom, I'm the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and I've got a question for you. What do you think they're doing with your DNA? Oh, that 23andMe kit that you sent off, and you got back that report that told you you were Irish, you were French, you were Jewish? Wonder who's interested in that information. It's not like you've sent it off to a database with millions of other people and they can steal your identity, and who would really be interested in that information other than you? Well, maybe your friends and family, but there's one, yes, one, who is so interested in your DNA that it would be something that would make you afraid. And that is Satan himself. Why would Satan be interested in your DNA? Because there is a Y chromosome marker that determines whether or not you are in the line of Aaron. That's right, the biblical line of Aaron the priest. That's because if the priesthood comes back and the high priest takes his role as the head of the Sanhedrin, they will be the ones to call for the return of Jesus. Well, what can they do with your DNA? Well, there are 40-plus countries weaponizing DNA today. And imagine if Satan could weaponize your DNA and use that Y chromosome marker to take out the line of the high priest, then Jesus doesn't come back. That is the plot behind the best-selling book, The Codex, now out in 2nd edition, on Kindle, $2.99, also available in paperback. This is a biblical thriller beyond comparison that's going to take you on an incredible journey to understand what they could do with your DNA. I also want to encourage you to visit our website, ignitinganation.com, and click on special offers. There you're going to find the yellow cover of this book, The 7 Laws of Abundant Living, Lessons Learned from the Tree of Life. We're going to take you on a journey in the Garden of Eden to the seed, the ground, all the way out to the fruit that reveals things of the natural that God is trying to reveal supernatural truths. Contained within these pages are 7 laws and 7 lessons within each law. They're going to take you on an incredible journey of understanding about the life you live in the fruit you bear. I want to encourage you to click on that yellow cover. We're going to ask for your email. Now, we won't send you spam because spam is not kosher, but we will send you the first chapter of this book. I want to encourage you to get 7 Laws of Abundant Living, Lessons Learned from the Tree of Life. You can get it on Amazon. You can get it on Barnes & Noble. You can get it Books A Million, wherever great Christian books are sold. Take this journey with me to the Tree of Life in the Garden of Eden and to the Tree of Life we see again at the River of Life. Get your copy today. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're talking with Sandra Peoples, author of Unexpected Blessings, The Joys and Possibilities of Life in a Special Needs Family. Sandra, welcome back to the program.
Yes, thank you.
Sandra, for you and your husband, because your husband pastors a church and you pastor alongside of him, I'm sure you've created a very safe and welcoming environment within your church for both your son and your sister. But statistically, the statistics show that parents of children with disabilities are not getting plugged into the local church. What is it that you feel is behind that? And once you've identified the problem, maybe you can share with us some possible solutions to that problem.
Yeah, I think my husband and I, we came to the church where we are now about 1.5 years ago. And as he was going through the interview process, he was very clear that if there wasn't a place in our church for James, then there wasn't a place for him as pastor. And so some churches already have special needs ministries in place, and some churches like this one had to develop a special needs ministry that would welcome James and then welcome any other people with disabilities who came in. And so I think the first step that churches, especially the pastoral staff, have to take is building a theology of disability. They have to understand what God's purpose is in disabilities and then see these families as Jesus sees them, as he, we know that he leaves the 99 and goes in search of the one who's not part of the flock. And so some churches need to adopt that mindset to say whatever we have to do to attract families and keep families is what we'll do. The verses that I use to build a theology of disability are Psalm 139, where we talk about how we are all fearfully and wonderfully made. That includes my son and my sister, just like it includes anybody else. The next one is in Exodus 4, where Moses and God are talking, and Moses says, I can't speak. I have this stuttering problem, we think, and God says, who makes man mute? Who makes him hear? I do that. It's for my purpose that he has skills and abilities and also disabilities. And so that verse was really instructional to me to understand that God would have a purpose behind any challenge or disability we would face. And then, of course, in John 9, Jesus and the disciples are walking. They see a man who was born blind. The disciples say, who sinned? Was it this man or his parents? And Jesus says, this isn't a result of sin. This is so that God's work will be displayed in this person. And so those 3 passages are great places to start as you, as a pastor or a pastoral staff, are developing a theology of disability, even a theology of suffering. There's ways that that families with disabilities, there is a very obvious brokenness, and people can see that, but that makes us an asset to the church instead of a liability, because God uses what we go through to comfort others. And so I think that's one of the ways that families like mine can bless the churches that we attend. We don't cover up or ignore suffering. We can help guide other people to see God's purpose in that. And so one of the pieces of advice that I give to churches is that you don't have to come up with a solution for every possible circumstance. You don't have to have a sign language interpreter or programs in Braille. You just have to meet the needs of the people who do show up each Sunday. And so you meet that family, you meet their needs, and then you keep developing this ministry. And if we see it any other way, then we'll only leave it to the big churches with the big budgets and the big buildings. But all of us are called to reach out to families like mine so that they're welcome at any church they're able to attend.
What message do you have for the family of a special needs child that is reluctant, very reluctant to step out because they're afraid of ridicule, or they're afraid of the pastor that can't handle a crying baby or a squirming child, and they don't have the special needs room, and so the parents want to take the child, which I strongly encourage. I grew up in a Jewish synagogue where all were welcome. As children, we were welcome. We were welcome. We weren't told don't run around the synagogue. We were not told. We were not told not to talk to the rabbi. We were actually told to, and we were welcomed to do so, although they were quite intimidating figures at the time. When I was in the pulpit, I had a time when I dismissed the children after the first half of the service. I had them come barreling, running down as fast as they could to grab a hold of my leg. And I would hug as many of them as I could get my arms around as I blessed them. And I wanted them to know that I was approachable, that if I could be approachable at 3, that at 13, when they faced a problem, that I would be approachable. It's the same thing with special needs families. How can we encourage them to step out and not, even if they are rejected, even if they are found uncomfortable, that they not give up this pursuit in finding a place or even being an agent of change that confronts the church to say, pure religion is taking care of widows and orphans. These are children with disabilities. Jesus said, whatever you do, the least of my brothers and sisters you do to me. Are these not the least, and should we not be addressing this? And what can we do to make a difference here where we can feel accepted? Because otherwise we are going to be a part of the none, and we're not going to go to church, and therefore where will those God lessons come from?
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. And one of the challenges I think, especially special needs parents face, is that everything we do is a battle. We have to battle with school systems. We have to battle with doctors. We have to battle if we go out and eat. And so church can sometimes feel like just one more battle. And they don't always have the capacity, the strength to do that on a Sunday morning. But I think the more that families like mine who have success stories, the more that we tell those success stories, the more that we talk about how wonderful our church has been and has welcomed us and made accommodations for us, then those families can say, well, if it worked for Sandra and her family, I'm going to give it one more try. And so the keys for them are to call ahead to the church that they want to attend, try to communicate as much as they can about what their child's needs are, see if that church is even willing to try to meet those needs, or if they're immediately shut down. And then if the church that they keep trying to go to doesn't welcome them, then they have a decision to make. As you said, am I going to stay and fight for my child and other children, or is there another church that also preaches the gospel that I'm comfortable in, that I can attend, that will accept my child? And that's a decision all of us face. As a pastor and a pastor's family, the church that we get hired at has to meet our needs. Even when James was diagnosed, we couldn't move churches, even though it was a small church with few resources. The members of that church had to come around us and support him in the ways that we needed. And that was the start of a special needs ministry. From there, they started doing respite nights, where families from the community could bring their kids and have like a 3-hour break so the parents could go out to dinner or go Christmas shopping or whatever they needed to do. Our church here rents out a theater and does a free sensory-friendly movie. And so the lights are up a little bit and the sound is down. And families like mine who may have never even gone to see a movie at a theater are free to do that. And so the church not only impacts its members when it welcomes special needs families, but it really impacts the entire community. We've seen that because even our school district is willing to promote our respite nights and promote any events that we do because they believe in providing these opportunities for families like mine. And so they're excited that the church is the best and the safest place to do that.
You bring up an interesting point that the church has throughout history been the center of the community, but has abdicated that role to many other institutions, including the school system. And the school system has become the center of events for many things. They offer many more programs. They have band, football teams, basketball teams, baseball teams, all kinds of other sports activities and those kind of things. But if the school were made, especially in the special needs department, were made aware of coming alongside of activities like this and even offering any of their tools or offering any of their facilities or offering any partnership and support, or the parents who are a part of that are made aware, that this then becomes changing the community and is driven by the need of the church to accommodate special needs children. There is no reason that this is competitive with what we would call sheep stealing or going after members of other churches. You're not soliciting membership. What you're looking to do is create a safe place and a safe zone for children with special needs, whether or not it be autism or any other special needs, to be able to come together and find support for the parents who then could experience positively their activities. I can imagine, like myself, who was a education major with special education focus, that if I was still teaching school and dealing with those children, I would want to volunteer my time to be able to connect with a larger community that was supporting these children and their parents. And support groups then are an outcropping of this, and you and your husband become a part of that planting and that growing in your community of more special needs friendly environments. You know, your book is written in such a way is to help parents move from a place of pain to finding their purpose. What are those steps that you have been able to identify that they need to go through, that are reality checks, that there is a grief, there is an anger, there is a real sense that why me and where is God in this? But you address how to process that. Walk us through some of the methodology that you present in the book.
Okay. I really, from watching my parents friends, and then going through it myself, I think that there's 5 phases that special needs parents go through. There's the initial phase where they get the diagnosis, then they have to take care of themselves, go through the grief cycle. Then they really have to rebuild that foundation of faith. If they find that there were any things they believed that weren't true anymore, then they rebuild that. The 4th phase is focusing on relationships. And that's where we talk about strengthening their marriages, really encouraging the typical kids in their life. How's the extended family going to relate to us now? How are our friends going to relate to us? Like, my boys are 13 and 11, so if our peers are the same age and we go to their house, James is not like an 11-year-old. He's much more like a toddler. And so how does that affect our friendship when I just can't throw the boys in the room where the Xbox is and expect them to play? I still have to watch James and be with him. And that could be true forever. When our boys are 18 or 25, he still may need my attention. And so that changes events that you can go to and things like that. And then the 5th stage, and where I hope that all parents get to, is a place of giving back, where they realize that this was God's purpose for their life all along. It wasn't a mistake. They didn't take this detour and now they're trying to find their way back. I saw that in my parents' lives, how my mom, even when Sybil and I were little bitty, she started a workshop in the town where we lived that was a place where people with developmental disabilities could have jobs, where they could contribute and be safe. And she had a vision for that when Sybil and I were just 3 and 2. And she made that happen. And now over 100 people are employed there in this workshop in a town that we don't even live in anymore. And I just see that over and over and over. You think of Eunice Kennedy Shriver, who started Special Olympics because she had a sister with disabilities. Well, now that's a worldwide organization that affects thousands and millions of families. And so I just really feel like that God calls each one of us as special needs families to serve one other family in some way, whether that's in the waiting room, at school, at church. And then if God continues to build that in us, then we serve more and more families and just really make a difference for our communities, our churches, and even like Kennedy, Mrs. Shriver, even the whole world could be impacted because God gave us a family member with a disability.
You know, when we look at what the church is called to serve, the church is called to serve not only delivering the gospel message, but the needs of the community. I'm looking at a November 29, 2017 report that the CDC says developmental disabilities are on the rise, that between 2014 and 2016, the prevalence of developmental disabilities among kids ages 3 to 17 increased from 5.76% to 6.99%. And the rise stems from an uptick in children diagnosed with a developmental delay other than autism or intellectual disability. And that means that there is more to this than meets the eye. It's not just genetic defects. It's not just Down syndrome is easy to identify because of the chromosomal, but the range of autism, Asperger's, then we fall into the category of behavioral situations with ADD, ADHD, dissociative identity disorder. There's a number of new things that have come into play. You'd want to believe that this is a conspiracy on the part of the medical community to increase diagnosis, medication, and put more burden on the school system and the family system. But the reality is there's no denying your sister has Down syndrome.
Right.
So this is not something that supports some statistical analysis by a pharmaceutical company looking to advance their agenda of selling more product.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, and I work for Key Ministry, which is an organization that helps equip churches to meet the needs of not only kids with disabilities, but with mental health issues. And that includes ADHD, bipolar, kids who are adopted and have reactive attachment disorder. So our organization helps churches and therefore helps families see these kids as how God created them and meet their needs so that the family feels confident in how they meet their needs. One of the posts on our website says, you know, when your child has a mental breakdown and goes into a mental hospital, nobody brings casseroles like they do if you break your leg. And so there's a stigma that we have to overcome as parents of kids with disabilities and mental health issues and just, like you said, this whole range of things that we just continually see this uptick in. And will the church and will believers respond with compassion as we need to do, or will we respond with judgment? And I feel like God will call us accountable for that, for how we love people, because it's not our job to decide, well, that kid just needs more discipline or that kid just needs X, Y, or Z. We just meet the families where we are. We tell them that God loves them, and then we pray that the Holy Spirit works in their lives to bring about His purpose for them.
Sandra, you were the sibling of a special needs child. In this support system, is there support for the siblings? We talk about mom and dad and having to deal with it. Then mom and dad have to deliver the message. Maybe the child, the diagnosis at 3, and you have an 8-year-old already. Well, how do you explain to the 8-year-old how life is going to change? And are there support systems in place to help the sibling of a special needs child?
Yeah, that's a great question. When I was growing up, my sister and the other families of kids with disabilities, they were very close. We all went to the same church. They were in the same special ed system. And so not only did our siblings grow up together, but we, as typical siblings, grew up together as well. And so I actually dedicate the book to my mom and 4 of her friends because they created that support system for us, not only for their kids with disabilities, but for those of us siblings. And so now we can call on each other and say, you know, mom and dad are getting older. What is your plan? What is your long-term plan to help your sibling? And so at that point in the early 80s, my parents created that for us. And I think now there's more opportunities through community efforts, like Easter Seals or ARC. Those kind of organizations can provide support groups for siblings. But again, this is another great way that churches can step in and provide, like we provide respite services for the child with disabilities, but the siblings are also welcome to come and they are included. I really think that growing up in church was the place where I could be seen as not just Sybil's sister, but as a separate person. And so my church developed leadership skills in me. They encouraged me to become a teacher, gave me opportunities to lead a Bible study, encourage other girls and then women. And so I wouldn't be where I am now without the support of my church growing up and how they invested in me when my parents maybe sometimes were busy at doctor's appointments or therapy appointments or something like that. My church family stepped in ways and continued to encourage and reinforce what God was doing in my life. And so community organizations, but churches especially, even without a formal program, if they just see the siblings for who they are, like my older son does theater, that's his giftedness. And we have a group of ladies from the church who come see every show that he's in. And so the theater is a place where David isn't known as James's brother. He's just known as David, the actor. And so for those women to come and see him and support him is a huge encouragement to him.
Your book is geared toward families who have been delivered this message, but I can imagine that it would extend to the grandparents as well in how they need to be able to encourage their children who are facing the challenge of raising a special needs child, especially in today's environment where grandparents are more involved than they've been in prior generations. I would think that this would be an outstanding resource for them as well. And it may even be that because they are the established old guard at the church, that they may be the ones to move the pastor along to even suggest and entertain, especially when it becomes personal, that I have a grandchild with autism or I have a grandchild with Down syndrome and the church isn't meeting the needs and we need to do something. There's always that older voice, that more mature voice that's been around that seems to catch the ear of the pastor more so than the family themselves in need. So it's a clarion call for those who are involved in the church to perceive the need and have the church rise up to meet the need. For our audience, how can they find out more information about you and your organization?
Okay, I'm at sandrapeoples.com, and then I'm on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, Sandra Peoples. That's the easiest way to find me. And then the organization that I work for that helps equip churches, they are keyministry.org, and they're also doing a great job just servicing churches. We have a Facebook group with 1,200 members that are special needs ministry leaders across the country. And so if people are looking for help or resources specific to the church, that's a great place to get connected. And then most of my writing on my website is geared toward families.
Wonderful. We've been talking with Sandra Peoples, author of Unexpected Blessings, The Joy and Possibilities of Life in a Special Needs Family, brought to us by our good friends at Bethany House, a division of Baker Publishing. I want to encourage all of you that there are the needs of families out there that are being unmet and that you too can play a part in changing their lives. Whether here in North America or around the world, this is a common problem where families are not being made to feel welcome to bring their children in because the church is not equipped. And this is a clarion call for the families to rise up and to find a way to process through the news of a child with special needs, but also to be able to affect change in their community, to rise the level of the community so that all families are raised up according to the Word of God. Sandra Peoples, author of Unexpected Blessings, thank you so much for being with us here on Revealing the Truth.
Yes, thank you so much.
You're welcome. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.